Hello, hello, are we back? See if I can pull up the chat here, there we go. Are we back? I wanted to pull up a picture of a Xoloitzcuintle for you. You can see it very, very, very interesting. You can see they're hairless. You can see the bristles of the mohawk there. Super, super interesting creatures. They don't behave like dogs at all either. They don't behave like dogs at all. So very, very interesting. If you can wind up developing a relationship with the Xolo, is super, super profitable and be a very deep clinical relationship you might be able to develop there. Look at the ears on this guy, huh? That is someone who is definitely tuned for sound. Okay, enough of the Xolos. And back to me. Okay. So, our star nationally certified list, Brittany Axtell, shared that she had a great experience of her crash returning. That's what we talked about in the last class, right? Or the before actually, and then being cleared within about a week with the Minje formula. So that's really great that happened with Brittany, and I would expect as much. So Brittany, I would say stay on that kind of a formula for a while to make that all of that that blood heat and that wind that's coming out in that way is addressed. Okay, and then you can always let me know if there are further developments, and we can figure that out. Okay, all right. So very good. And someone says wrist swelling reducing. That might be from Shermo. Very good. Very good. Good. So I'm glad that you guys are having good experiences here with the Mingje formulas. Again, sometimes all we need to do is make a little addition to some other formula that we're doing, or just tweak our formulas a little bit with keeping the channels in mind, or keeping the certain relationships between the channels that might be affected in mind. So I really recommend getting our diagnosis very, very clear, okay, when we're doing the Minjie medicine. The diagnosis is so important. What are the channels that are really, really involved? And is it a primary channel that's involved? Mostly just one primary channel, or is it a relationship between two channels? Okay, so whenever it's a relationship between two channels, then we can use herbs that that also feature that relationship. So that's a really kind of quick and easy way to make formulas very rapidly and effectively, because herbs that embody in their structure specific channel relationships, like our balanced channel relationships that we are so familiar with, and even some of the other, like the branch relationships that I've introduced you to a little bit. Anytime that is going on, we can use those herbs very, very, very effectively. So that's something that as balanced practitioners we have, and as Mingje practitioners, we have the ability to really sort of leapfrog into a whole other level of diagnostic and treatment abilities, because we understand the importance of these kinds of relationships. Okay. All righty. So, as I remember, we were combining Xiakucao with all kinds of different things to see where it takes us, in order to learn about how incredibly useful this Xiakucao is, how available it is. So we want to make use of that, and how cheap it is. We want to make use of that also, because we can. Matt, I just saw your comment about the punk dog. For sure. Anyway, this combination of being readily available, which is very important. We have to be able to use herbs that we have access to. That's very, very important. And including herbs that might not necessarily be a part of our normal Chinese medicine pharmacopoeia. This is something that is really critical as we move into the future with our Minjie school. And you guys are the first group of Minjie students, so I want you to really hold that in a special way, please, because you're learning things that nobody else out there is doing. So I really want you to pay attention. I want you to utilize the stuff that we're doing and make your own observations and make your own discoveries and share those things with us as we move forward in time. There's not going to be another group of Minjie students for a while. So you guys are it for now. There will be more in the future, but you guys are really at the cutting edge of this. So as we move forward in the future, we're going to have some herbs that are available to us and some herbs that won't be available to us. And, you know, we're facing this now. The herb availability compared to 20 years ago is abysmal now compared to what it was 20 years ago. So some things are disappearing, but some things we can get, and we can get them in other forms and blah, blah, blah. But you know, the harvesting methods and everything has really changed in China, and so we just have to hope and pray that that our herbal medicine and our herbs are going to continue to be cultivated in good ways in China. And the best way to do that is by really demanding that the quality is there and not buying the cheap herbs just because you can buy them cheaply, but really demanding the high quality and that they meet certain minimum standards and that those standards are monitored really well and that there's no shenanigans going on with the monitoring or the verification processes. It's very complicated, but there are all kinds of other herbs that are coming available to us, kind of a staggering number of herbs. Initially, a few years ago, maybe 20 years ago, different kind of Ayurvedic herbs started becoming more popularized. But those herbs have become quite available now that a lot of them still are available, but that sort of huge interest in Ayurveda that was around maybe 20 or so years ago has waned. But a lot of those herbs still are available. We really need to, because of their accessibility, we want to promote that, but we also want to begin to experiment with those herbs and define them in terms of the 3 T's. Okay, whatever they're used for traditionally in India, we want to pay attention to that for sure, but we also want to just start experimenting with our own and see what we discover the actual use is for our purposes as well. So we need to redefine all those Ayurvedic herbs in terms of Chinese medicine. There may be somebody who's done that already. I don't know if anybody has, but it's high time that we do, even if nobody else has. So this is why we need to cultivate our understanding and our ability to use the 3 T's, because as we encounter different substances that we can't just look up in a pharmacopoeia or in the Minjie Formulary Companion or something like that. And keep in mind, the Formulary Companion is just compiled of stuff from all of these different pharmacopoeias, right? It's not original observation for any of that stuff that's in those Formulary Companions. The only stuff that is original in there is all those channel relationships that I discuss and lay out for you, okay? But we need to be able to look at any different herb or any different substance, whether it's considered an herb, a mineral, or whatever. We need to be able to develop our sensitivities and our understanding of the 3 T's in order to define any substance, okay? Remember, this is what the Royal Academy did literally in China, is they came up with the 3 T's for every single substance that they found. And that pharmacopoeia is enormous. I think it has, 8,500 entries or something like that. it might be helpful to go through that pharmacopoeia and use that as a basis to see what they said about all these different things that we may run across. But again, we have Ayurvedic herbs that are very available to us now, and there's also a lot of herbs that are beginning to come out of the Amazon. And many of these herbs are actually being, if not cultivated, they're being gathered in very responsible ways, and they are being gathered and cultivated in ways that are helping the tribes that are involved with the territories where these herbs grow. So that's a really good thing to promote. The difficulty is that those herbs are being marketed by sort of current supplement definitions, and we're not being told really how those herbs are being used traditionally. That's because most of the people who are promoting these herbs actually don't know how they're used traditionally, or they're not necessarily taking on whatever the system is that the tribe is using in order to use those herbs. Because sometimes it requires, like with our own 3Ts, it requires taking on a whole different worldview, and that's not being done by and large with anything that I've seen so far with the Amazonian medicines. But there are going to be hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of Amazonian medicines potentially that we can add to our pharmacopoeia as we move forward. And so we want to really pay attention and you know, buy these things every once in a while and experiment with them and see what the qualities are, see what the 3Ts are, define them for yourself, and how you might be able to use them. I know another herb that has been highly popularized in recent years has been kava. And that's that's an herb that comes from the South Pacific. And kava is a very, very strong medicine. And traditionally, it's used as a ceremonial herb in the South Pacific. And those ceremonies are very, very powerful, and we need to respect those. And there's certain ways that you're supposed to treat the kava in that ceremonial context. I was very fortunate in Fiji to be introduced to what that is all about, and it's a very beautiful level of ceremony. And the fact is that they're also promoting the sale of kava outside of the South Pacific for non-sacred use, because there aren't that many people who know how to use it in that way. So unfortunately, in my opinion, there are people who are using the kava to get drunk or to get high from. And they're using it in non-sacred ways, which I'm not happy about, but it's inevitable when something starts becoming industrialized in that way. But that doesn't take away from the fact that kava is a very, very strong medicine. And one thing to keep in mind with the kava, it is very available. You can go online, you can get all different kinds of kava. And the interesting thing about the kava, I think, is that each, and it's not a surprise, but each different place that the kava is grown, and harvesting practices and things like that have profoundly different effects on the effect that that kava will have. So there's a lot of room for experimentation with this, you guys. I don't recommend getting loaded off of it, but maybe trying. In my opinion, kava can be used medicinally. I'm still experimenting with the best ways to do that. It's a little bit premature for me to describe to you exactly how I would use it, because I haven't experimented with it enough. I'll let you know over time. But the reason why it's so complicated is because each different kind of kava has different has a different effect, sometimes radically different effect, which is very useful and important for us to understand and to know. Um, uh, Matt, I know that you're closer, much closer to the South Pacific than most of the rest of us. I don't know if how deeply kava has penetrated into Australia or not, but it's all over the place. There are kava bars all over the place in California. I don't know about the rest of the United States, but there are kava bars all over the place. But again, as with most of these medicines that start off as ceremonial use, then industrialized nations take that stuff and they use it to get drunk on, but I think we can use it in very different dosages and use it differently. Okay, so Matt's bearing all here. He says his mom used to go out with a Fijian. He used it to go internal. He would go very quiet. Yeah. University kava was used as an example as an herb that interacts with Western medicine. Yeah, yeah. So it has strong effects on the nervous system for sure. For sure it does. So that's why my suggestion is that we begin to experiment not with dosages that are psychoactive. And it's very, very interesting. If you remember back to some of our very early classes when I talked about the toxicity of medicine, the definition of a toxin and a poison in a medicine or any kind of a substance is that it does what? Number one, it tastes spicy. Number two, it'll make your tongue go numb. Number three, it'll have psychoactive effects. So all three of those things define kava. Kava is all of those things. So we would definitely consider it to be a toxic herb, but that doesn't mean that that toxicity cannot be used in some very special ways. So again, one of the things that they say just in general, generically, is that they say that the mother root of the kava has more of an effect on the body. And they say that the peripheral roots have more of an effect on the mind. Now, in my experimentations with it so far, I don't think that's necessarily the case, but that at least they're trying to make some kind of distinctions. They do make some kind of distinctions between that, but a lot of the kava that's available will be a blend of the two. But I recommend if you do start experimenting with it, try to get non-blended kinds of kava and experiment with those. And that way you really see, okay, is it the mother root? Is it the lateral roots? Now we know in Chinese medicine, right now I will make an adaptation from the Chinese medicine point of view. We can say that for sure that the mother root is going to be treating the channels more directly, okay? And the lateral roots are going to be treating what? They're going to be treating the lo more directly. For sure, that's going to be happening, okay? And beyond that, it's still too early in my experimentation with it to let you know, but if any of you guys want to play around with kava a little bit, I highly recommend doing that because it's something that's available, and I think we can radically restructure the way that it's used to use it more medicinally. Again, because it has such strong properties, I think that we can alter the dosage way, 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 way down and learn how to use it pretty successfully. So anyway, that's just a Mingjie idea. That's sort of a Mingjie homework assignment that I'll throw out to all of you, because this is something in the future I want us to build our pharmacopoeia to include all possible substances that that we have available to us all over the earth. And when you consider that there's still many traditional cultures that have lots and lots of different herbs, we have to promote that. We have to promote whatever those original medicinal systems are also, because there's a lot that we will be able to incorporate into our Mingjie ideas and practice using the structure of Chinese medicine. In some ways, I think this is what I think this is part of the real value of TCM, actually, is that what they did was they learned how to synthesize a whole bunch of different different traditional medicines, a whole lot of indigenous medicines, into one form. And that was what Huangdi originally did. And then they did it again more recently in China. And so I think it's a good system, but we want to be as inclusive as possible with including worldviews in our synthesis rather than whittling it down as in the modern version of TCM. So we want to include and incorporate as many different ideas into our Minjie medicine as we can, right? And then Lisa says she knows somebody who's microdosing, I assume with the kava for treating anxiety. And that is one effect that some of the roots do have. It does have a calming effect. So it'll have a Shen calming effect, definitely. Yeah, with the kava. But again, different varieties of it will have different functions that maybe are not Shen calming. They could be stimulating. And also the dosage might vary. So again, let's just experiment with it and see. And we can have fun at those kava bars. Okay. All right. So let's move forward with combining Xiaogucao. Okay. And I brought up the idea with our case study earlier, one of our case studies earlier with this kind of freaky RA case about that internal wind. And I want to talk about iatrogenic wind also, and that means wind that might be caused by our treatment or the treatment of another practitioner, okay? We might even do something like tonify the liver yang that could wind up creating wind, huh? I know that's kind of an unusual idea for some TCM practitioners. Why would you want to tonify the liver yang? Well, we've got to tonify liver yang a lot of times because the people might have the lack of the motivation. And they might have their liver yang might not be functioning properly. So it doesn't mean whenever we think of liver yang, it's not always a negative thing, right? We need to have that liver yang in order to have the yang liver functions, okay? But the thing is, if we are doing something like that, we have to think of how are we going to keep it from turning into fire that goes racing into the head. That's always our goal. Remember, the fire rises. So the essence of a lot of the Taoist practices are in bringing everything down into the lower dantian, right? And then that helps with the bodily alchemy. Okay, that heat can be beneficial if it's down in the lower jiao, if it's down cooking whatever is going on in the lower dantian there, and that drives the alchemy further. So that's the idea of this alchemical cauldron. That's always what we're working with in Chinese medicine. We're working with a person's alchemy. And even though most people come to us for remedial work, that means they're coming to us for some kind of a problem that they have, and we want to get them back to a normal condition. That's what most people expect of us. Really, we're kind of closet Taoists, and we're helping them with their alchemy, because usually what's happening with these illnesses is that it's something that's springing up in their own personal alchemy that needs addressing so they can move forward and continue to develop as people. Okay, so anyway, how do we keep this fire from racing up into the head? So we've been talking about Xiaogucao. So here's an interesting way. So I'm shocked that people haven't say tonify the liver yang. Like, how would you tonify the liver yang? Well, one way you could do it would be you could work with, let's see here, Xiaogucao plus, get well situated. And I will share the screen in just a moment once I figure it out. Okay, here I'm going to share it with you. Share the screen. There we go. Okay. Hopefully you guys can see that at this point. And move this. Okay. Um, so we could add the Lu Jiao Shuang, right? So this is the glue that comes from the Lu Jiao. And it's got some really interesting qualities and properties. One of them is that it goes through both the pericardium and the liver. So fantastic. We have um, that Jueyin happening. And then also, amazingly, look, it also goes through the heart and the kidney. So it also goes through the Shaoyin. So Jueyin and Shaoyin. Wow, this is a really, really useful herb. And the other Lu Jiaos don't have this the same level of a palette of channels that it works with. Okay, so sweet, a little bit salty because it's an animal product, right? It's that horn, a little bit astringent, and this kind of astringency is the kind of astringency that keeps the men from ejaculating. Okay, so it's going to be astringing the lower jiao in that way. It could also be used to astringe, if the women have the discharge, if they have a cold discharge, it could be used for that as well. Sweet, so it's going to be consolidating, generating a little bit of fluids, and this saltiness also doesn't just mean that it's going down into the kidneys, but it can also reduce accumulation. So this Lu Jiao Shuang is really interesting. Okay, it's a tonify yang herb, and yet it goes through the liver and the pericardium, right? So we can use it to tonify not just the kidney yang, but also the liver yang as well. And so this is interesting because this astringent quality is gonna automatically, it's sort of like closing the lid on the pressure cooker a little bit, isn't it? So things are going to start warming up and heating up because of that consolidation. Okay, great. But then how do we keep it from rising up too much into the head? We could add some xiaokucao. Okay. Well, actually, since we're talking about xiaokucao a lot, we're actually adding the Lu Jiao Shuang to the xiaokucao, right? So we could either support this a lot or just a little. Hang on, I want to take this Sholo off the screen so he's not staring at me. Okay. We could either do it a lot or a little. So if we're primarily tonifying the liver here, the liver yang here, then we'd use more Lu Jiao Shuang, right? And if we just want to tone it down a little bit, then we add the xiaogucao. So we're stacking the liver, okay? So we're supporting and we're reducing a little bit as well, okay? And then that gallbladder there is going to also help to conduct some of that down, because interestingly, with the Lu Jiao Shuang, we've got all these yin channels, both the hand and the foot nicely balanced there, but no yang channels. So the addition of the xiaokucao actually should make Lu Jiao Shuang much more powerful. Why? Because everything's going to be grounding through this gallbladder channel here. And especially the places that we want it. We want the liver to ground, and also we know, remember, our gallbladder is really our star fu for the heart. Okay, so that's going to be helpful to do like that. So again, even though that Lu Jiao Shuang already has some astringency to keep it in and not just like fly out, so yang won't just fly out. Okay, it has some of that saltiness to bring it down, and the sweetness to consolidate it a bit. Okay, so we can use that xiaokucao, the coldness of the xiaokucao can cool it down a little bit because the Lu Jiao Shuang is slightly warm. Okay, so we can use the xiaokucao to cool it down a bit. The bitterness of the xiaokucao is going to disperse it a little bit, so help to move it around a little bit more. You could think of that bitterness of the xiaokucao almost like a regulate qi in that way. And the acridity is going to move it a little bit more also, right? Okay, so what are we doing here with this simple combination? What are we doing? We're tonifying, circulating, and consolidating the yang, okay? And balancing the Jueyin and the Shaoyin. Okay, very, very simple combination. but also very effective to use in this way. Let's see, there's something popped up in chat. Okay, we're going back. Matt says, when Bubba's Fijians would come around at night, they would be talking excitedly and very friendly, but then after kava, they would bring up musical instruments and play very quiet, slow, and introspective songs. Always sounded so peaceful. Yeah, Matt, I don't know if you got to take place or take part in any of those ceremonies, Matt, but it's really very, very, very beautiful. Honestly, I don't know what the women do. I don't know how the women participate or if they even have their own kava ceremonies. I have no idea, because in Fiji, they have a very interesting culture that is, at least when I was there, it was really gender divided. It was the most gender divided culture or place that I've ever been in my life. There was the male society and the female society, to the point that they literally spoke 2 different languages. So it's good to know that there is a separate ceremony for the women, because I never knew that. But they would never mix the ceremonies together. It was so beautiful, because when the men would do the ceremonies together, inevitably, just like Matt talked about, they pull out ukuleles, and these are huge Fijian men, and they sing in these high falsetto voices, these very, very tender songs, and they'd be crying and singing these songs. Very, very, very beautiful. Anyway, thanks, Matt. It's good to know that the women had their own ceremony. I assumed that they did on some level, but being male, I was never asked to participate in those ones. So anyway, back to Lu Jiaoshuang. So the simple combination could be used to balance all kinds of things. And I like this combination a lot, actually. It's something simple that we can do if we're thinking about tonifying somebody's liver yang in a balanced way. Okay. Remember, Bansao Wendai actually had a lot to say about all this. He says in there, the theory of the pericardium being referred to as the ministerial fire. He says that comes from later on. And he says it's not the original meaning that they talk about the ministerial fire in the Neijing. He says the Neijing only says that the chest center holds the office of minister and envoy, right? Joy and happiness arise from it. And when it transforms the blood vessels, there will be joy and happiness. That tells us a lot about the pericardium, okay? So I'll say it again, okay? The chest center, right, holds the office of minister and envoy. Joy and happiness arise from it. How many people could use joy and happiness? Probably more than a few of your patients, right? Okay, when it transforms the blood vessels, remember, we're always talking about those blood vessels in the chest with the pericardium, okay, and that's what gets knotted up. Okay, there will be joy and happiness. So when that flow returns, there's a natural joy and happiness that happens with people, okay? He goes on to say, whenever human blood is sufficient, fear of cold will be absent. So we know that blood belongs to heat, and that qi does not solely belong to fire, okay? That is the reason why the liver and the pericardium are not referred to as ministerial fire. Only the pericardium connects with the triple burner, and thus the fire of the triple burner is able to combine with the pericardium. The liver is linked with the gallbladder, and therefore it is said that the liver is able to transform fire. After all, fire qi completely returns to the gallbladder, and this is fire that is engendered from wood. Okay, the gallbladder is linked to the liver and diaphragm and connected to the membrane net. Okay, that's how I translate the membrane net, which is the, he says that the membrane net is really what the sanjiao is, which is the connective tissue that goes all around the body. Okay, that's what he means when he talks about the membrane net. Okay, he says that is the triple burner, that is the shanjiao. The transformation of gallbladder fire entirely takes place in the triple burner. Super interesting to know. It comes and goes within the linked membrane net. Okay, that's why the gallbladder and the triple burner control ministerial fire together. Okay, so somehow the gallbladder and all these connective tissues are what manage the fire all over our body. Okay, that fire that comes from the wood. So I think that's really, really interesting to contemplate how all those things work together. And that combination of the pericardium and the triple burner, remember, they're always working as a team in that way. Okay, so we've been optimizing our use of Xiaogucao for dealing with the liver so far. And right now we're focusing on that pericardium liver Jueyin relationship, because that gives us a really solid Jueyin foundation, doesn't it? Okay. Also, we want to think about that Lu Jiao Shuang and some of the other ones that we talked about before in our last class. Again, because there aren't that many pericardium herbs. And I want us to get really familiar with using those pericardium herbs and thinking about them when we're working with liver pathologies, because that's going to help us with that Jueyin foundation, okay? Thinking how to include those herbs in our formulas and our strategies. How would we optimize for the liver when we're using those channels? How? Okay. So how do we optimize for the liver when we're using these channels? So if you'll remember, we just go to our chart. And we're always working with these herbs. How can I get everything from the page at the same time? Shut that off. Okay, I'm going to make that disappear. That'll make it easier. And I'm going to move this down so I can still see the chat. Okay, all right. Sorry, folks. So again, we just go to our chart. These are the herbs that we're always going to, or the channels that we're going to be working with whenever we want to optimize for the liver, right? So we know Xiaogucao already enters the liver and the gallbladder, right? Okay, we can go still farther in our optimization process. So liver, gallbladder is already taken care of. Liver and gallbladder. So when we combine Xiaogucao with herbs that go through the large intestine, the small intestine, and the lung, we're going to be optimizing for the liver even more, right? Okay, so this is what we've been doing so far, is learning how to maximize our optimizations for different channel systems. Okay, so we'll pick a few examples because there are actually hundreds of possibilities we could choose from here. Okay, so first, let's always, we want to try and go for the biggest jackpots we can by narrowing it down. Remember, what I consider to be a jackpot is when there are 3 or more channel convergences or synergists with an herb when we're optimizing for a particular channel. Okay, so when we have 3 or more synergists, that's when we have a jackpot. Okay, all right. So how are we going to do it? So there are actually hundreds of liver, lung, clock neighbor herbs. There's so many. So that really doesn't narrow it down too much, okay? We can spend the rest of the weekend easily focusing just on that relationship. That's fine with me because it's really useful. But I want to give you more insight into our process than just focusing on that one relationship, okay? I don't know if there are more liver, large intestine or liver, small intestine herbs, but it's very easy to find out. Okay, so we could go to our Mingjie Formulary Companion Volume 5. We could look them up. So we'll do liver, small intestine first. Okay, so we're looking for Biejing, right? No, we'll do large intestine first. So we're looking for that Biejing relationship between the liver and the large intestine, and we're also looking for liver, small intestine herbs. That's a clock opposite relationship, right? Okay. So it looks like there are a lot of those Biejing relationship, liver, large intestine herbs, okay? 54 to be exact, if I count them right. okay? Uh, and that's way better than hundreds, okay? Let's see about the clock opposite herbs. The liver, small intestine herbs are only 11 of those. So there are a lot less of those liver, small intestine herbs, that clock opposite relationship, than there are the Biajing relationship of liver, large intestine, okay? So that's a lot easier, so we might as well start there because we're more narrowly cast, okay? So remember, we're looking for any herbs that would go through, hopefully, liver, gallbladder. Well, we already got Xiaokutao doing that, so we're really focusing on anything that goes through pericardium, really, or large intestine, small intestine, or lung. Okay, so if we're already looking at liver, small intestine, then we're also scoping for herbs that will also be going through large intestine and lung, basically. Hey, large intestine and lung, that sounds like a familiar relationship, doesn't it? Right? So, what do we find? Okay. Right away, we find, of course, we're going to find our old friend, so useful in so many situations. And if there's any herb that will make people complain about the bitterness of a formula, it is the appropriately named Kushen. This herb actually is very bitter, I think, by anybody's standards. It's quite bitter herb, and it will turn the whole formula bitter very easily. So you don't need to use a whole lot of the Kushen, okay? If we use Kushen plus the Xiaokutao, it's going to exaggerate both the bitterness and the coldness of the Xiaokutao, okay? And it's going to take us more deeply into the territory of, hang on, I'm going to put this down a little bit. It's going to take us more into the territory of the liver. So we got liver stacked here. It also goes through the large intestine and the small intestine. So it's got both of these things that we're looking for down here, right? Large intestine and the small intestine. Does it go through the lung? It doesn't go through the lung, right? But we've got some very, very strong synergists here. Okay. And that also takes us back to the heart and gallbladder synergy. Okay. Which we want to use for clearing heat. So that's a very strong association that happens between these two herbs of Xiaokutao and Kushen. Interestingly, it gives us two name pairs at the same time that happen to perfectly fit and enhance exactly what we're looking for here, right? That's stomach and large intestine. So we have stomach and large intestine, and the UB and the small intestine there as well, okay? Gallbladder synergizing, again, with the heart, also with the liver. So let's see. So this also gives us, so that also gives us all three of our foot yang channels as well when we combine the Xiaokutao and the Kushen. So there's a lot going for this combination here. Is this a combination or is it a, well, it is a formula actually, because we have both yin and yang of hand and yin and yang of the foot as well. So this is a small formula, a microformula, if we want to use our common popular terms. This is a microformula, Xiaokutao, with a lot of different synergies going on in here that I like. So again, we've got that those two name relationships, the stomach and large intestine, UB and the small intestine, okay? So instead of actually having a load of extraneous and unrelated channels here, it actually turns out that Kushen actually supercharges exactly what we're looking for, okay? So these aren't extra channels that we're talking about, or extra, not in the sense of being extra channels, but superfluous channels, okay? Okay. And because it has those three supporting energies for the lung, we can also easily claim that our combination distal herbs are lung channel in as well, can't we? Right? So we got, what are those we're talking about the liver, the large intestine, and the UB here, okay? So that distals the lung in as well, especially because that UB has a double relationship with the lung, all right? And look here, interestingly, all the other channels distal in the spleen as well, don't they? Small intestine, stomach, heart. Now that's super interesting. So then we're distaling in both the lung and the spleen. Do you see that? So there's much more to this in these relationships than it looks like on the surface that you would find in the books. There's a very, very profound set of synergies going on between Xiaokucao and Kushan, which you could apply to any other herbs that embody this liver, gallbladder, Biaoli relationship in a pure way. That means they just go through liver and gallbladder, and there's a few of those. Okay. So this is a very strong, we would consider this to be a very strong, not just a combination, but a very strong formula. Okay, it's super powerful to clear heat, dry dampness, and activate the liver channel. Right? It's using a really strong network of supporting channels and moving the heat out of all those foods. We could also shift our focus here. We could add this herb, which is something I do all the time. We could add some Baihua Shishicao to this formula. And what's going to happen there? This is going to shift it, okay, to more large intestine, small intestine, more liver. So we're stacking these now. And we're stacking stomach as well. So we got the liver, we got the liver covered, plus the 3 worms with just this one herb, right? Stomach, small intestine, large intestine. Okay, those are our 3 worms. Okay, so this is a great combination, even if we just use it with Xiaokucao. But I like how all of these stack up here. Okay, so we could put those worms to good use in conducting the heat away. Okay, now here's another combination that we could use to put more focus on drying dampness. We could add this herb. Now we could also stack it with some of those other ones if we want to emphasize some of those qualities, but it'll just get confusing if we do too many at once, right? This is the Ji Shui Cao. This is another fairly available herb. We call it the Gotu Kola. Used for different things in Ayurveda also, I know, and some other forms of medicine use the Gotu Kola. So it's acrid, it's bitter. So if we stack it with the Xiaokucao, we're also stacking the acridity and the bitterness, okay? We're also stacking the coldness, so we're really driving hard in that department, okay? We've stacked the liver here, but then we also have 2 other foods. So we've got 3 food clearing that heat from the liver with this simple combination. Very, very simple combination. And but you got 3 food clearing the heat. So I like that. Strong synergies, because that small intestine is supported by the spleen and a Biejing relationship there, right? Large intestine is supported by the kidney with a clock opposite relationship. So we've got both spleen and kidney working on getting rid of that dampness, as well. Remember, that's part of what we're doing here, getting rid of dampness. Plus, you got the liver, the spleen, and the large intestine. We can distal in the lung by that liver, spleen, large intestine. That's distaling in the lung. So we can really move a lot of the fluid out, can't we? Because we got the spleen, the kidney, and we distaled in the lung. So we're using all three of those fluid systems to move fluid out, okay? And if we need to focus on getting rid of even more fluid, we could stack either of these herbs in as well. These are very related. Also, there's another very common herb. It grows all over the place. This is the plantain. Not the plantains that you eat, but the plantain that's a weed, right? So we could add the chachienza. Add a little plus here. Okay. So if we add the chachienza, we'd be emphasizing the lung. Plus we've got that liver and the UB. So again, it's emphasizing the lung. Or the chachiensao, little bit different scenario here. No UB with the chachiensao. No UB. So it's a little bit simpler, a little bit more focused. If you want that, both of these herbs would bring in the lungs outright. So we could expect that the lungs and the breathing would be compromised from fluid in either one of those scenarios, right? We could stack all these herbs up if it was a very severe case. Stack all of them up, and all the ones that we've been talking about so far. Let's see what that looks like. Just to condense it all to get it on the screen for us here. Okay, so we start off with the xiaokucao, with that plain liver gallbladder. That plain liver gallbladder, and then we start adding, what was that next herb? Oh, the who had the heart in there? Who had that heart? Oh, the cushion, right? So we added in the cushion. So we start stacking these up. And then the next one was the kidney, UB, and the liver, which was which is the most recent, is the chachienza and the chachiensao. Okay, so we start stacking these up and get some very interesting combinations going on. It gets quite complex, So you see the heart is going to be well supported here with all this small intestine stuff. Strong small intestine, or we can say the opposite. Small intestine is actually supported by the heart more here, because we got all of this different combinations going on, really clearing a lot. Okay, so it's also bringing in the lung. Okay, so again, we do this. How we want to think about how are we stacking? We look at the patient's symptoms. Okay, wow, we might need to bring in some more of the lungs. So we start stacking this way. If the lung doesn't seem so compromised by the fluids, maybe something else is going on. Maybe we need to bring in more of another system. Okay, this is just one way to do it. Okay, this particular combination of all these herbs is really going to cool down the liver and move fluid. That's what we're focusing on here. Okay. Now, what if we want to, we'll shift gears here. What if we want to tonify qi in a deficient person, but they tend to heat up in the liver really easily because of a liver pathology? Okay, what would we do then? So we would do something like this. Again, so this is a deficient person who's qi deficient, okay, but they easily tend to heat up in the liver, okay, because of that liver pathology. So let's do this. Xiaogucao plus the shaji. And you guys remember, I really like this buckthorn, right? The sea buckthorn fruit. Okay, Matt. So you have asked, you've brought this up a few times, and it was actually plaguing me over the last couple of weeks, right? So very bitter and cold. So some of those combinations that we're using are very bitter and cold. Would we balance it out with another herb? Okay, so this has really been like a monkey on my back for the last couple of weeks, because you brought this up a couple of weeks ago and I didn't address it fully. So I want to address it now. When we're talking about a formula and we're talking about balancing a formula, this is very, very important, you guys. I want you to remember this. When we're talking about balancing a formula, we have to say relative to what? Okay? We're not just making formulas here to make a formula, and we're not, and ideally a formula is not going to be balanced just sitting there as a formula. Why? Because we have to put that formula into an unbalanced person, right? So what do we learn from our balance system? We use asymmetry to create symmetry, right? So sure, the formula itself might be very bitter and cold, but we have to ask, who are we using the formula in? Okay, it's going to be somebody who needs to have a very bitter and cold formula, right? So sure, in many cases, in average cases, we want to head towards neutrality. I'm not saying that you're wrong. What I'm saying is that we need to look at the person. If we can't analyze if a formula is balanced or not just by looking at the formula, because we have to ask, who's the formula going into? That's my point. Okay, so presumably if we're doing something like this, we're making a very bitter and cold formula, is because somebody has a whole lot of heat and toxicity that we're using that bitter and cold formula for. Okay, now would we need to balance it out with other herbs? It all depends on what they can tolerate. Okay, so that means either we're going to use maybe small amounts. In a very sensitive person, we might need to only use like a very small amount in a sensitive person. But if it's a very strong person, we might have to use more. Okay, but again, we're going to graduate it. We're going to start slowly moving up. Unless we know that this person is just excess, we know that they can just take a practical infinity of herbs and have very little effect. Okay, then you can just throw the whole ocean of herbs at them, right? So again, always when we're talking about a formula, the formula itself may or may not be balanced, but that's the whole point of why we're making the formula, is to add a balancing asymmetry to the patient's pathological asymmetry in order to create symmetry. So I hope that makes sense, right? So finally, I'm liberated from holding that for the last 2 weeks. I hope you understand that, Matt. So here's a formula that is more balanced in itself, okay? Xiaogucao plus the shaji. Why? Because we have a combination of cold and warm here. So again, we're using this in a to tonify qi in a very deficient person. No, it's an important point. That's why I'm thinking about it, right, Matt? That's why I've been thinking about it, because it's a really important point. We always want to keep it in mind. Who is the patient that we're treating? So we can't fully discuss the if a formula is balanced or not outside of the context of treating a person. Okay, so here with this theoretical person, we can kind of invent a person for each one of these combinations or formulas, right? We can invent the ideal person. This is always what we're thinking about. Who's the ideal person for this? So this is a person who we want to tonify their qi, so they're a little bit weakened. Okay, this is a deficient person, but they tend to heat up because of liver pathology. So we put in some xiaogucao. If they're already heating up, we put in more xiaogucao. Okay, if we think they might heat up, then we just put a little bit to sort of hedge. Okay, just a little bit to hedge. All right. So with this formula, we're spinning our formula a little bit away from the liver. Okay, we wind up with a lot of lung support as well. All right. In this case, I include the stomach in that because the Shaji's sourness is generating fluids as well. A lot of fluids that Shaji generates through the stomach, huh? Okay, so that's going to help to cool down and nourish the liver. Okay. Okay, we could use this formula, we could add it, and it is a formula, remember, it's because we got the lung and also large intestine and the small intestine. We got the gallbladder and the stomach and liver, right? So we have hand and foot, yin and yang. Okay, so that gives us a formula, all right? So we could use this combination or this formula as a support for clearing liver heat by using more xiaogucao than shaji, or to mitigate heat and congestion while generating qi by using more shaji than xiaogucao. Flexible, okay? We want to be flexible with how we do these things, huh? We can use every formula for multiple applications depending on how we vary the dosages, okay? And also playing with the timing of how we administer it, okay? All right, so we flogged the liver plenty for now. Let's take a break. Let's take maybe slightly more than 5-minute break, and we're gonna start focusing on optimizing xiaogucao for the gallbladder, all right? Okay, let's take a break, see you soon.